Hey, Chef Roux here. Today we're going to talk about roux. Roux is the basis of many dishes, especially French or European, especially sauces or soups. It's any combination of fat and flour. Most people think of roux as butter and flour because it is the most commonly used, but technically speaking, you can use any fat plus flour to equal a roux, which is the basis of my bacon mac and cheese. I use bacon fat instead of butter. Any fat will work, okay? In general, it's 1-to-1. Some people go a little heavier on the fat, some people go a little heavier on the flour. Sometimes it kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve, the thickness that you're trying to achieve. But in general, good rule of thumb, equal parts fat and flour equals roux. Now there are three main colors of roux, and the lighter the roux, the more it thickens, but it doesn't have very much flavor. The darker the roux, the less it thickens, because the thickening power has cooked out of the flour, but the more flavor it has. That's why gumbos and things like that are based on a very dark roux, which generally you cook for a really long period of time, though there is a cheat we'll talk about. But it has a lot of flavor, not a lot of thickening power, which is why other things are added into things like gumbo to actually do the thickening. Okay, so the more flavor, the less thickening. The less flavor, the more thickening. Okay, basically comes down to how long the flour has been cooked. I'm going to show you all three: white, blonde, and dark. That way you have a good visual representation of the different types of roux that you can use. In my pan, I've got some oil heating. This is just good old canola oil. Like I said, any fat and flour, right? And I've got about 1/4 cup of oil in here, so I'm going to add now 1/4 cup of flour. Now, my oil has already been heated. If you're using butter or something like that, you do need to melt the butter before you would add the flour. Okay, so you can see you need to whisk it, whisk it, whisk it, whisk it. Okay, and this right here is a white roux, where you've just barely started cooking out the taste of the flour, and you've got your fat and your flour combined. I'm going to take a little bit of this out so that we can look at it and compare it to the other ones in a little bit. Okay. Now, if I continue to cook this roux, again, you don't want to stir constantly. Stirring is not cooking. If you're stirring constantly, the flour is not going to stay against the bottom of the pan, and it's never going to have a chance to start to darken. Okay, but you do need to stir it occasionally, and you can see that this is starting to darken just a little bit. We're going to let this cook, stirring every once in a while, and if you notice, I'm making sure to scrape the sides, right? You want to make sure that all of the flour is incorporated. It's also kind of a smell that changes. You'll smell as the flour starts to cook. But I'm going to let this keep cooking, and I'm going to stop and show you when it's at blonde. Now you can see here that the foaming has subsided, and you can see that the flour has gotten to a much darker color. It's still not a dark roux, but it is more brown in color than white. This is where we call blonde. So I'm going to take a little bit of this out and put it in another ramekin so that we can compare later. Now, a lot of people think of blonde as a peanut butter color. That's true. You can see it's kind of peanut buttery. Some people call this a dark roux. To me, this is still not a dark roux. I'm going to let this keep cooking. Again, you don't stir it super often, but make sure that you are scraping the sides as you do it. And we're going to cook it to a dark roux. Now, there is a cheating way to do a dark roux. The cheating way is that you bake the flour in the oven so that it's already done a lot of the flavor developing and the cooking off. So that is how you can cheat and get a dark roux faster. And most people cannot tell the difference. In fact, I have never met anyone that can tell the difference in flavor between a 3-hour slow-cooked roux, which is traditional for dark, especially if you're using it as a flavoring for like gumbo and things like that, and a flour baked, then added to the fat roux. It just speeds up the process, and instead of 3 hours, it can take as little as 15 minutes, maybe 20, okay? Way faster. That's how to cheat to get a dark roux. You can see that this is nice and dark brown now. This is a dark roux. Okay, so I'm going to just take a little bit of this so that you can really see the difference if you line them up side by side with these 3 roux. Okay, against the white it's a little easier to see with all 3 roux. So this is our white, this is our blonde, and this is our dark. Most thickening power, least thickening power, somewhere in the middle. Most flavor, least flavor, somewhere in the middle. Okay, and generally speaking, the color of the roux corresponds to the color of the sauce. So something like a bechamel, which is made with milk, is a white roux. Velouté, which is usually made with a chicken stock, is blonde roux, the color of chicken stock. Espagnole, which is made out of beef stock, is dark roux. Dark stock, dark roux. Generally speaking, color of the roux corresponds with the color of the liquid that usually goes in it. Not always, there's some exceptions, but good base general rule. Now you understand the 3 main colors of roux. Some people put a 4th one in there that's about halfway between blonde and dark. I usually just do the 3, but now you know how to use fat and flour to thicken your sauces or flavor your sauces depending on your goal.